let's do some awesome stuff with the Bill of Rights, content statement number 7. Follow my laser pointer. Isn't that hilarious? All right. Just in case the copyright police come and get me, I want to make sure that you know I did not make this template myself. I got it from these people, and they were pretty adamant about me making sure that I put in this stuff. So I don't want the copyright police to come and get me, right? Because that would not be good. All right, so copyright police cannot come and get me now. Okay, what are we looking at here? We are looking at the content statement number 7, which you've already done a form over, but I want to explain it a little bit because I haven't explained it. There are 3 parts to it. There's the Federalist Papers part, there's the Anti-Federalist Papers part, there's the Bill of Rights part. The Federalist, Anti-Federalist debate going back and forth over the ratification of the Constitution leading us to the Bill of Rights, of course. So just some highlights here. The debate presented by the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers over protections for individuals and limits on government power resulted in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights provides constitutional protections. I just got to say it right, sorry. Protections. No, sorry. Protections for individual liberties and limits on government power. Okay, so we've kind of looked at a little bit what the Bill of Rights says, but let's go into depth later on. We'll get to some of these down here. Now, just so you know, the process here that was going on was 1787, the Constitution is written, but it's not yet ratified by the states. 9 out of the 13 states had to ratify it. And so some people said, no, we shouldn't ratify it. And that were these guys, the Anti-Federalists. And some people were saying, yeah, we should ratify it. And they both had like articles, papers, essays written all over the place to try to get their point of view across. The Federalists said, yes, support it. The Anti-Federalists said, no, don't support it. So the Anti-Federalists, they did not want government to have very much power. As you can see here, the Anti-Federalists also published their concerns related to the shift of power from governments of the states to a strong central government. They did not want this. Their concerns included, they thought that if a strong national government, a strong federal government came into being with the Constitution, then taxation would become repressive. If you don't know what repressive means holding you down, shoving you down. That taxes by the national government would hurt people like you and me. That the national government could use a standing army against their own citizens. I mean, hadn't the British done that? Right? Those crazy European British people that have weird ambulance sounds, right? When you can hear the ambulance go by. Come on. Who wants to hear that stuff right now? That, of course, that wasn't back then. But you get my gist, right? Like, just because the British have it doesn't mean that we have to have it. In fact, they used it in the late 1700s when we were still their colonies. They used their standing army to hurt us. Think Boston Massacre, right? Think Lexington and Concord. They were actively firing on Americans. And if you don't know what a standing army is, it's just a professional army that is around all the time. We take this for granted because we have one, but it wasn't necessarily the case that that was going to happen. We could have had just an army that comes along every now and then when it's needed, like the Minutemen during the Revolutionary era. So the Anti-Federalists were scared that a standing national army would pose a threat against us, you and I, because that's what the British had done. And they wanted to establish a balance of power between the national government and the states' governments. With that balance tending towards the states more than what the Constitution gave, because the Constitution gave the power to the national government. So for example, the Supremacy Clause, which says the national government is supreme in all cases. To the Anti-Federalists, this was a dark, ominous, gloomy future that we might be experiencing. So they didn't like it. Oh my goodness. Mr. Beavers, are you doing sound effects? Okay, look at this. This is stop doing the sound effects. Sound effects. Okay. This is Brutus. This is he is an anti-federalist writer, and here's his argument. See if I can shrink this down any smaller. I cannot, but it's okay. Here's his argument. Obviously, not Brutus Buckeye, not the Brutus that we think of when we think of Ohio State football, and not the Brutus that killed Julius Caesar. He just took that name, that nickname, because he was like, if Brutus killed this dictator, this tyrant, Julius Caesar, then I'm going to take the name because I'm going to take down this dictator constitution that's being proposed. So look what he's saying. He said, if we have taxes like the Constitution wants, look at what they're going to tax. They're going to tax elections. Now, the national government didn't do that, but states did later. Tax our land, tax our houses, tax our buildings, tax our windows and fireplaces, tax our cattle and all kinds of personal property. Do you really want that to happen? And he's saying, no, I don't want it to happen. Stop it. Okay. Now, but look at what he goes on to. He's like, oh my goodness, what if they tax our liquor, spirits, wine, cider, and beer? Oh my goodness, what if they tax our beer? This is going to be awful. Oh no, no, no. Oh, somebody call the way ambulance. Somebody call it. Way ambulance, somebody call it. I want it work. What a boomer. I can't get this thing to work. So again, they were like, the anti-federalists said that the taxes are going to be too much. Of course, they also said standing army, too much. The balance of power should be towards the states, not the federal government. Okay, so hopefully you get that gist. Now, what did the Federalists think? The Federalists thought that the national government needed to be stronger because the Articles of Confederation were not strong enough to keep the peace, to keep us safe from foreign enemies. So we have to strengthen the federal government, is what the Anti-Federalists said. Now, question for you. Which argument do you find more convincing, Anti-Federalist or the Federalist? See here, the Federalists supported the Constitution. They wanted it to be ratified. So some of the things that they thought was important, was necessary, is that you need national taxation for it. Rule of thumb: Anti-Federalists, weaker national government. Federalists, stronger national government. They think it's essential to tax so that we can have money to make the federal government operate. We've got to have a strong standing army, because if we don't, the British, and at that time the Spanish, could just come back and they were nipping at our heels in the West anyway. What's going to stop them from taking us over, parts of us? We need to have a strong military all the time. Standing army. There needs to be a stronger central government. The states have caused too much trouble. We're going to balance it, tip it towards the power of government towards the national government, not towards the states, towards the national government, not towards the states, the national government. But we know that problems can arise. So we have checks and balances to make sure that that national government doesn't get out of control. You dig me so far? Do you dig me? All right. See, the national government was supposed to have lots and lots of power. When He-Man turned into He-Man from his, alter ego, he was like the Federalists saying, I want the Constitution to have power. If you didn't watch He-Man when you were a child, then you were deprived. I'm sorry. He-Man's awesome. Federalist Papers. I did my master's thesis on the Federalist Papers. I've got to talk about them a little bit sometime in class with you and go through them. So here's what Hamilton is saying. Hamilton is saying in Federalist Number 1, the very first Federalist paper, again, trying to support the Constitution, after an unequivocal experience of the inefficacy of the subsisting federal government, you are called upon to deliberate a new Constitution for the United States of America. What in the world does that mean? Do you have any idea what that means? If not, an experience that is unparalleled, it's unrivaled, it's nothing that we've ever experienced before, of the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. After we've had that terrible experience, you, people of New York, people of the United States, are called on to deliberate on a new Constitution for the United States of America. The Constitution. To him, this was extremely important. The subject speaks its own importance, comprehending in its consequences nothing less than the existence of the Union. If we don't pass this Constitution, if we don't ratify it, he's saying the Union will break apart. And the 13 states will fight each other just like every other republic in the history of the world has done. And there won't be any American government anymore. That American Union is important, and he's saying the safety and welfare of the parts of which it is composed, the fate of an empire in many respects the most interesting in the world. He is saying that the American government at that time was the only government based in liberty in the world, based on the people in the world. So he is waving the flag for America. Yay! I wish I had a sound effect for that, but I'm a boomer. Boomers can't do sound effects, apparently. There. Whatever. Going back. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question. It's America that's going to decide the answer to this very important question. And what is that very important question? There's no other country in the world that can do it at that time because we were the only one conceived in liberty. What's that important question? Whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend on their political constitutions on accident and in force. What does that mean? What question is he saying is so important? It's up to us to decide whether or not we can have good government based on us sitting down after the craziness of the revolution, all the bloodshed and the emotions, and sit down, and can the people use reflection and free will choice to create a government that will protect their rights? A good government. Can the people do that? Or are we forever, is the human race forever destined to depend on our governments? That if they're ever good, it was on accident. Or if they ever keep the peace, it's because they force us into submission. That's what he's saying. Either the people can choose a government and rule themselves, or the people can't. And they need kings. Which is it? If there be any truth in the remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may with propriety be regarded as the era in which that decision is to be made. A wrong election on the part we shall act may in this view deserve to be considered the general misfortune of mankind. If we get it wrong, then we might as well never, ever, ever, as a human race, try never, ever, ever again to have democracy, to have liberty, to have freedom. Because if we can't get it right in 1787 and 1788, then nobody can get it right. And we might as well just have dictators for the rest of our life, because they're the only ones who are going to be able to keep the peace. Obviously, the people can't do it. That's what he's saying. That's what hinges on this ratification of the Constitution. That's what's at stake. Free government or not. He's saying that America is going to show the rest of the world. Yikes. There's something else I want to go over with you. Is Federalist 51. This is by James Madison. And this was a really important, a really important Federalist paper. Why do we have checks and balances? Why do we have checks and balances? Why do we have the president being able to veto, and the Congress being able to override the veto, and the Supreme Court being able to rule unconstitutional, and all those other things that we've kind of gone over? Well, you can read this first part right here, and if it makes sense to you, that's awesome. And I would love to see if you can understand what it's talking about here. But it does have something to do with checks and balances. But here he starts to get really philosophical, James Madison. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices, that checks and balances, should be necessary to control the abuses of government. Why do we need checks and balances? Why are they necessary? You admit they're necessary, right? Right? You admit that they are necessary. So why? Let me ask a question. If men were angels, but what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? What does he mean by that? Well, here's what he means. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Does this make sense? If human beings were perfect, would we need government? I think the answer is no. If we were perfect, if we were angels, we would do the right thing every time, and then we would never need government to come along and make sure that we're doing the right thing and to punish us if we're not. Right? Does that make sense? But obviously we're not angels. We make mistakes. And sometimes people are downright evil. So we need somebody to keep us in line. Sometimes, says James Madison. If angels were to govern men, then neither external nor internal controls on the government would be necessary. So we know that we're not perfect. But what if our government was made of angels? Would we need separation of powers? Would we need checks and balances? Would we need limits on our government? If perfect people were governing us, perfect beings governing us, we wouldn't need internal controls, checks and balances on each part of government. We wouldn't need external controls, constant elections to kick people out of office, right? Because they would be perfect and they would do the right thing every time, and we wouldn't need them to be voted out if they did the bad thing, because they wouldn't be doing bad things, right? But we know that we're not perfect, and we know that our government officials are human beings too. They're not perfect either. They're not angels. In framing a government which must be administered by imperfect humans over imperfect humans, the great difficulty lies in this. First, you must enable the government to control the governed. You have to give imperfect humans the power to keep imperfect humans in line and not kill and steal from each other, etc. The next place is you have to oblige it to control itself. You have to give government the power to control itself. A dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on the government. But experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. Having constant elections is the primary control on government. We can kick out the bad guys, kick out the men and women that don't do a good job. But just in case that doesn't work, we have to have auxiliary precautions. We have to have a backup plan. Checks and balances are the backup plan. Do you agree with James Madison? Do you agree that if men were angels, no government would be necessary, but we're not angels, and so therefore government is necessary? Do you agree with him? Do you agree that this pretty much is humanity? Here's Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove, that old Disney movie, that there is a lot of good that we are capable of doing, but yet we are tempted with doing lots and lots of selfish things, and sometimes we choose the bad over the good. Do you agree with that? If you don't, that's fine. Let me know, because I'm not trying to tell you what you have to think, but do you understand Madison's reasoning? That's the question. Now let's just go back to this whole question in the first place of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Which do you agree? Do you agree with this, that we needed a stronger national government than the Articles of Confederation? That we need a national taxation power, national standing army, and a strong central government with checks and balances? Or did you agree with the Anti-Federalists who said national taxation is bad, can become oppressive, a standing army can become oppressive, and that the states should have more power than the national government? Which do you side with? The Federalist won. They convinced more people, more delegates. The states, the 9 necessary states needed, ratified the Constitution. All 13 eventually did, and every state since. But the big legacy that the Anti-Federalist had is that there's still this fear of government getting too big and powerful in the American DNA. And the Anti-Federalists said, we need a Bill of Rights. So 2 years, 3 years after the Constitution was ratified, James Madison gets the guy who wrote some of the Federalist Papers. He gets through Congress the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and they do things like protect our freedom of speech and press and assembly and petition and religion. Our First Amendment rights that we hold dear. Our Second Amendment are rights to protect ourselves. Third Amendment rights, no quartering of soldiers. Fourth Amendment rights, no illegal search and seizure. Due process of law, Fifth Amendment rights. Eighth Amendment rights, no illegal search and seizure. And that's the background to the Bill of Rights. I don't know if you have any questions. I don't know if this bored the tar out of you. I don't know if you got a kick out of my terrible use of sound effects. Dang it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Quit it. iPhone sticks.